Hello and welcome to another episode of Punk Rock Politics with John Smith. We're going to show you the entire video released today at 6:30 p.m. or technically yesterday. By the time this is released, tomorrow or later on today, it's past midnight. So at 6:30 p.m. on March 19th, 2020, the Poor People's Campaign released policy demands to deal with the coronavirus. So about the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. In 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many others called for a revolution of values in America. They sought to build a broad fusion movement that could unite poor and impacted communities across the country. Their name was a direct cry from the underside of history, the Poor People's Campaign. Today, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has picked up this unfinished work. From Alaska to Arkansas, the Bronx to the border, people are coming together to confront the interlocking evils of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. We understand that as a nation, we are at a critical juncture, that we need a movement that will shift the moral narrative, impact policies and elections at every level of government, and build lasting power for poor and impacted people. During the summer of 2018, from Mother's Day to the summer solstice, poor people and moral witnesses in 40 states committed themselves to a season of direct action to launch the campaign. What ensued was the most expansive wave of nonviolent civil disobedience in the 21st century United States. More than a series of rallies and actions, a new organism of state-based movements was born. Now in over 40 states, the groundwork for a mass poor people's movement is emerging. In June 2019, we convened over 1,000 community leaders in Washington, D.C. for the Poor People's Moral Action Congress, which included the largest presidential candidates forum of the pre-debate season, the release of our Poor People's Moral Budget, and a hearing before the House Budget Committee on the issues facing the 140 million poor and low-income people in the nation. Just so you understand, there's 320 million people in America, people. 140 million, you do that times two, that's 280 million. That's almost half of our people are poor. Over the next 9 months, we are embarking on a 25-state We Must Do More tour. Mobilize, organize, register, and educate. That's what MORE stands for. Which will lead toward an unprecedented mass poor people's assembly and moral march on Washington on June 20th, 2020. In the summer of 2020, we will demonstrate the power of poor people to be agents of change in not just one election, but at the very heart of this democracy. In this time of significant danger and real possibility, a moral fusion movement is necessary to revive and advance our most precious constitutional and moral values. But this can only happen if those who are impacted link up with other moral leaders and people of conscience to break through the silos of our work and the divisions that have been wrought in our communities. In the emerging year, our ranks will increase as we broaden our efforts and stretch the banner of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, even wider. We rise together because, number one, we rise to demand that the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in our nation, from every race, creed, color, sexuality, and place, are no longer ignored, dismissed, or pushed to the margins of our political and social agenda. 2. We rise not as left or right, Democrat or Republican, but as a moral fusion movement to build power, build moral activism, build voter participation, and we won't be silent anymore. We rise to change the moral narrative and demand that the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy / militarism, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism all be ended. We rise to challenge the lie of scarcity in the midst of abundance. Number 5, we rise to lift the voices and faces of poor and low-wealth Americans and their moral allies with a new vision of love, justice, and truth for America that says poverty can be abolished and change can come. If you believe it's time to rise, join us. Okay, so we're going to get into Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival right now. We're going to get into the video, and then I'm going to give you some analysis and commentary. Don't forget, you're watching with Punk Rock Politics, and John Smith is going to give it to you straight and give you all the information so you can make your own decisions and help you understand all the specifics. All right, so here we are. Pretty soon, what you're going to have is the moral response to COVID-19. Coming from, poverty amid pandemic, the moral response to COVID-19. Reverend Dr. Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II and Reverend Dr. Liz Thea Harris from the Poor People's Campaign. And it's a national call for a moral revival. Ronna Epting and Reggie Hubbard from Move On. All right. So Now you know that what the Poor People's Campaign is, and this is what they think this is what they believe we need to do to address the coronavirus outbreak, COVID-19. It's a specific strain that's killing and causing a lot of suffering. So, all right, it's going to start any minute now. We have to fast forward this a little bit. Sorry for the little shifts. I'm getting it all underway. There we go. It should be good. There we go. Oh, sorry about that. Let's see. Don't worry. There we go. It's going to start soon. You're going to start hearing people. I don't hear any audio.
To create a space to heal, to hear one another, and to make sure the most vulnerable at this moment are not left behind yet again in our country. We come together tonight because not to have all the answers, but to explore this uncertainty together. My name is Reggie Hubbard, and not only am I the congressional liaison for Move On and one of their strategists, I'm a certified yoga teacher and an adherent to the yogic tradition. And it is from that tradition and my training and my heart that I offer you blessings, best wishes, peace, love, and joy. When things are changing so rapidly, we can wonder what is true and what to hold on to. And you may feel as though there is no hope, but what I'm here to tell you is so long as we draw breath and have health, hope is abundant. We're in this time together, and together we will meet this moment and transform our society from this uncertainty. Our redemption is at hand. It is my honor now to offer and introduce Ronna Epting, the Executive Director of Move On, and Reverend Doctors Barbara and Theo Harris from the Poor People Campaign for our conversation tonight about poverty amidst the pandemic and a moral call in this moment. I will be monitoring the Facebook Live chat, so we will interject periodically your thoughts and comments. But without further ado, Ronna, please take.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Welcome everyone who's joining us on the live stream, either through Facebook or Twitter, from hopefully the comfort of your home. I'm honored to be in community with all of you, and honored to be in community with Reverend Theo Harris and Reverend Barber here tonight, and my good friend Reggie Hubbard. So thank you for joining us. We're going to have a discussion tonight online to really ground us together in community around the moment we are in, not just here in the United States, but all around the globe. We want to discuss with everyone and highlight the demands that we must make in this moment to inspire our country to do better, to be better, and to meet the needs of our common humanity, our shared dignity in this moment. So we are talking about the coronavirus pandemic and all of its implications intertwined within it, and how it is changing the very structure of our society as we know it every moment of every day. And we can talk about how we got here, and we can talk about how we feel in this moment, and we have a whole hour together here tonight. So I am Ronna Epting. I'm the Executive Director of Move On. And Move On is a community of millions of people all throughout this country, in every congressional district, in every state, in urban and rural, from progressives to Democrats to Republicans to Black, brown, young, old. We are a multiracial coalition of people who simply come together to take the agency we have to make our world a better place. And I'm honored to be here tonight with reverends from the Poor People's Campaign. And I'd ask you to introduce a bit about yourself and the Poor People's Campaign before we get started.
Good evening, and thanks so much for being here. My name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, and I have the honor of being the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, with my colleague on the line as well. The Poor People's Campaign is a nonviolent direct action movement. We're organized in more than 43 states across the country, and we're building the power of poor and impacted people so we can win an end to racism and poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and this distorted narrative a narrative that blames poor people, people of color, immigrants for all of society's problems, a narrative that tries to pit us against each other, and one that feeds us the lie of scarcity when we're living in a world, in a country of beautiful abundance. And so it's great to be with you all this evening. Reverend Barber.
Be with all of you. Let me thank, first of all, our Creator and all of the strength and power and love of our Creator to bring us into this moment. I want to thank Move On for opening up this space and partnering with us. I want to thank Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival, and all of those who are connected, all of our organizers, all of the people in the states, all of the poor and low wealth leaders, the moral leaders, impacted people. You know, in this moment, as you say, to introduce ourselves, this is such a we moment. We are all now in ways, some terrible, some tough, and some tremendous. We're all, one germ is affecting all of us. So the way I would like to introduce us as a moral fusion movement that, as Liz said, takes on those issues of poverty, racism, ecological devastation, the war economy, and this distorted moral religious nationalism that somehow, God is only concerned about America. The only moral issues are hating gay people, being against women's right to choose, being for tax cuts, being a member of a particular political party, and being for guns. We find out in moments like these that is so wrong, so heretical, so misguiding. And when it is helping to give people cover to make decisions, it gets us in a mess. And so tonight, I just want to introduce us by saying, we is the most important word in the justice vocabulary. The issue is not what I can do or what you can do, but what we can do when we stand together, sometimes suffer together, fight together, pray together, and move to change this world together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to have a discussion here together, and we ask you to join with us in the Facebook Live chat. And we'll actually also, during this discussion, take questions from the chat, and Reggie will be monitoring the chat for us and share out your questions or comments to add to the conversation. But as we get started, I want to ask our friends here, how are you feeling in this moment? What does this moment mean to you right now for our world and for all of us? Reverend Barber?
I don't know in some ways. The emotion ebbing and flowing. I have a lot of grief in this moment, grieving for this nation and persons who have great political power, who have used them in all the wrong ways. I think our president and those that enabled. I think I grieve when I know the history. My father used to tell me about the swine flu epidemic in the early 1900s, and to know that history and to know mistakes that we made then by not caring for the poor and the most vulnerable among us first, even before that flu, and then certainly doing it, and then to see us making those same mistakes 100 years later, it's hurtful. Crowds are placed and wanting to fight back, but I'm also in a place of remembrance every day. And I'll say this real quickly. First of all, remembering the people around the world. I want to thank you for opening like that and not opening this call as just being about America, but remembering the people around the world who are fearful, who are frustrated, who are failing, who are sick, who are struggling, and said, who are dying. And also, in that same breath, want to remember those who were doing all of those things before this time. The people who were already dying, poor and low wealth, in hundreds every day before this time. We got to remember both hands in this moment. So life today is full of tears, it's full of frustration, some anger, grief, but also a deeper and growing commitment in this moment. That whatever we were fighting for in the Poor People's Campaign already, we are called now to push even the more in the midst of what's being revealed about this nation and greed and injustice now.
Thank you. Reverend Theo Harris, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I really relate to what Reverend Barber said and to the opening. You know, I feel a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of suffering. I've been talking to folks in our Poor People's Campaign across the country, hearing from brothers and sisters across the world about the suffering, the deep suffering that people already were in and are being thrust into even now more. You know, low-wage workers who are being sent home without pay, not getting hours to be able to work, homeless encampments that are being steamrolled, or folks being told that they should rest and shelter in place when they don't have a place to rest. You know, I'm a mom of 2 school children that are in the New York City public schools, the largest public school district in the country that just closed for at least a month. And thinking about those hundreds of thousands of kids, 750,000 of them that rely on free breakfast and lunch, who are now in very precarious positions. And just thinking about the deep suffering that is taking place and the deep anxiety about when is this going to change? How are we going to get through this? And is this going to, you know, cause the continuing free falling of our economy? And so, you know, what will that look like? I'm the daughter of a mom who survived polio, another epidemic. Talking to my aunt about, you know, the quarantine signs that were up in front of their house. Thinking about the lessons I've learned from my mom, who was so impacted by that epidemic, and wondering the same questions that Reverend Barber raised of, are we going to learn from pandemics, epidemics of the past? Are we going to learn from crises in the past, or are we going to allow for those that are rich and powerful to profit off of our suffering, to get bailed out when our communities are still left out? And so, you know, I'm feeling a lot, as I know you all are too.
And I know people all over this country that, as we're practicing social distancing and we're staying at home, and for many of us, it can feel isolating. And we just have, I mean, I feel so many different things at the same time. There is an influx and an overflow of fire hose of information that you can consume on this. And it's overwhelming, and it can lead to spiraling into disarray and despair. And it's so important to watch your intake, your incoming of that, and to be careful and purposeful and say, what do I need to know, and what do I have agency over in this moment? And I feel incredibly responsible because of the fact that I'm not part of the vulnerable population, wanting to protect my loved ones that are, and the people out there that are, knowing that I'm in a position where I'm less likely to be impacted by the virus, but I could be carrying it. So have to stay in the confines of my home and figure out what agency do we have as Move On members to do something about this. And then also just feeling like the floor is pulled out from under us in a way. The contours of society we are used to living within, at least in this generation, it's all getting moved around. But I also feel in spaces like this where people come together, and when I've talked to friends and family, and we've heard from our own members that they just want to be in community. And I think that's because being in community is one of the most powerful phenomenons in the world. Knowing that I alone can't really change much, but together we are incredibly powerful. And that's what restores me. And it's moments like these, and I wish we could speak to all the hundreds of thousands of people watching on live stream right now and have a conversation together with everyone, that it is us standing together, making and moving together and acting together, that's where we find our power, and that's where we find hope. And that's where we remind ourselves we're not completely beholden to those that actually are in the seats of power, that we actually can move them. So,
as you were saying that, I was thinking, I told you, reference 1919, Woodrow Wilson, who was also a racist in the White House and did a whole lot of negative things when the swine flu epidemic came. He caught it himself, he ignored it. He paid a lot of it, 650,000 people. But somehow, out of the midst of all that, for a moment, that epidemic brought people to a real sense of our equality. This one germ, as ugly as it is, as bad as it is forcing us to learn a lesson that I hope we do not forget if we pass through this. And that is that we are connected. We are inextricably bound together. That we should not be fighting in separate silos on all of these issues, like gay people over here and poor folk over here and Black people over here. That in fact, when we deal with the virus of poverty, the virus of racism, the virus of greed, we must from this moment learn even the more how important it is for us to be together. But this one germ is also showing us, exposing how hundreds of politicians in their greed can position a nation to be terribly unprepared. So the germ is doing one thing, but the greed and the injustice and the selfishness that we've done for years, it has actually created a space to make us even more prepared. And when I heard Liz yesterday, when I heard the other day that Senator McConnell say, vote for this even if you have to gag, describing, and it's not even a lot, it's a modest bill, it's not even what we need. But he said to his members to vote for this is like vomiting. Now, I would have rather that, but I think we need to hear it so we know what we have to do going forward to being a country and who may need a vacation. When we hear the president stand up and say, we're not a delivery system. And that's hard to hear, but all that's not being delivered, it needs to be. And when we saw Democrats, because we're equal opportunity in the Poor People's Campaign, back up on a provision, it was in there to cover all families, but then to succumb to certain big businesses to say if you're 500 people and 500 plus one, you don't have to do this mandatory paid leave. And to pull that out, this is a time that a lot of things will be exposed for people to see, and hopefully up out of it, we will see statesmen and stateswomen and people come to the fore to really say, wait a minute, if we continue to do this like this, we continue to make ourselves more susceptible in this moment to the kind of unearthing and the kind of disruption that we're seeing. And we cannot blame it all. One of the worst languages that the president is using now, we didn't see this coming. Yes, we did. We did. We saw it coming from history. We saw it coming from other viruses. We saw it coming with beyond. In fact, just before I got on this call, there's a report out today that a senator from my state, Senator Richard Burr, got an intelligence report, knew it was coming, and he told his wealthy donors rather than warn the nation. And so it is important that in this moment, all of the frustration and the attempts to help each other, we keep that analysis open and live, because we got some stuff we have to do beyond this epidemic to reorder our society.
Right. Let's talk a bit about the stuff we got to do for a minute. But first, I want to say for those watching on the live stream, there are two incredibly important things you can do right now. Number one is call your senators to demand a moral stimulus, not just any stimulus, a moral stimulus that speaks to the needs of everyone in this country and leaves no one behind. You can dial 855-999-1663. That's 855-999-1663. And you can tell your senators to put people before profits in their corona response by providing health, housing, and economic stability for all, and extra support to those most vulnerable. If we leave people behind in this stimulus package, we all suffer because this virus is showing us that we are all connected. So that is number one. Call your senators now. They are negotiating this now. And number two, you can go to moveon.org/poverty, and you can sign the Poor People's Campaign petition calling on Congress for a moral response to COVID-19. So those are two things you can do right now. And I want to open it back up to Reverend Barber and Reverend Theo Harris. Let's talk a bit about the connection between the pandemic and poverty and what we actually need to demand in this moment, demand from Congress that it be addressed.
So
Reverend Theo Harris, speak a bit to that? Yeah, thanks.
So before this pandemic started, there were 140 million people who were poor or one emergency away, just like the emergency we're living through right now, from deep poverty. 140 million poor and low wealth people. That's before this. That's before all the job loss. That's before all the medical bills. There's 15 million families in this country that can't afford water. And 4 million when they turn the tap on, if they do have water in their house, it's poison. That compounds, that adds to this crisis. There's 62 million workers who are not making a living wage, and not one county in this entire country where if you're working full-time and making minimum wage, that you can afford even a 2-bedroom apartment. So poverty is at the core of this society. And inequality and this level of poverty is what's making this pandemic so bad. It's showing that if one person, let alone the tens of millions of people in this country who don't have health care or have inadequate health care, are sick, then our whole society is sick. It's showing that if one person has no place to shelter in place, that everybody is at risk. And so what we're seeing with this pandemic is it's arising out of this deep inequality. And so we must demand, both in the immediate future, for the bill that Congress is still considering now, the stimulus packages that the Congress is still considering now, that we need health care for all, that we need paid sick leave for all, and not allow McDonald's to go and lobby that the biggest corporations who can afford the most have to pay the least, right? And so we need to stop the steamrolling of homeless encampments. We need housing for all. We need debt relief. We need for our democracy to be protected, and we have to enact a whole permanent set of demands that lifts the load of poverty.
Liz is right on it. And Liz, I like the way that you started with that, because that's where we always start. Because people say, what must we do now? The now must be rooted in the what was before we ever got to this. 700 people a day were dying from poverty and low wealth, 250,000 a year. What if we had responded in that moment to that? So we first have to, right now, say that everything we're doing must first address those who were already in crisis. We have to not live in the deception that some people just got in crisis at the beginning of March. No, there was this crisis ignored. This crisis not talked about by either party. Both of them talked about middle class and working class, but not the poor. And then if that's a framework, that's what moral means. Moral means the place from which you make your political decisions. It's not just what feels good, but what must be done and what's doable and what we have the resources to do. So right now, that's why we have to call these things. We have to challenge the fact that we will put $3.5 billion in stimulus. And if you add that to the $2 trillion unnecessary tax cuts we did, that's $5 trillion. If that had been used on the front end, we could be in a different place. And we must demand, if we can find $5 trillion in this kind of moment, we certainly can find it not in this moment. But here's some things we must do immediately and permanently. We make up a word. We must permanentize them, because it's not enough to do it till August and then quit. Immediate, comprehensive, and permanent paid sick leave for 100% of employees. We must do it now, immediately, and for the future. As Liz said, immediate health care for all. You can wrestle with how, but we can't have any more of these moderate proposals that just give a few people health care and leave 87 million underinsured or not insured. We need to guarantee annual income, universal income, right now in this moment, and not just a little bit, but enough to be adequate and for the future. We have to have a national moratorium on evictions. I want Liz in a moment to say how many people were already homeless before this event. So in this moment, we have to do things that are both for now and the future. We have to have a jubilee and debt forgiveness of medical debt and student debt and water and utilities and other forms. We have to do that right now. We have to have a national moratorium on water and utility showers. How can people wash their hands with warm water and soap if they don't have warm water? Immediately and for the future. And we must expand FEMA. Now, lastly, in this moment, we also must restore the infrastructure. A lot of what we see is because over the years, those who believed in tax cuts, when they did their tax cuts, they didn't cut the infrastructure on community health organizations, CDC, and others, so that we don't have the infrastructure to deliver it. And that's why one of our demands also is that we use the military. Now, we often criticize military. We're not saying put the military in charge. We're saying put the public health experts in charge of some of the resources that the military has, so we have the infrastructure to do what's necessary. And then right now, in the middle of this, make a long-term investment, just like we did a Marshall Plan after World War II. We need that kind of Marshall Plan or more right now in the middle of what's going on. And we can't just say, let's do it until August. And so we must call and fight for it now. Now, and there are other things. There are 21 other things that we talk about in our moral call, in our agenda that we want people to read and help us demand, and help move on demand.
Yeah, and they can find exactly what Reverend Barber walked through. If you go to moveon.org/poverty, you can find those set of demands plus the additional demands he spoke to. And I'll just say, we are at the beginning of this pandemic. The fallout from the health crisis is we are about to experience in this country, and others have experienced. And the fallout from the economic crisis will be long lasting. And we are going to need the voices of everyone who's watching tonight times 100. So find 100 people or find 10 people, we'll multiply that to continue to push decision makers in office, businesses, CEOs to do the right thing and prioritize people over profits in this moment and as we get through this moment.
No.
So again, go ahead.
You just said, I need to say this because you said it there and I want to push it. Not only do we need to tell them to do the right things, but we're going to have to demand that there's an audit going forward to make sure people aren't making a killing off of other people's debt. See, what concerns me right now is we had this lethargical, lackadaisical response that got us in this crisis. And now there's this call for corporations to come, and they're getting all these breaks, and all the regulations are being removed, which many of us fought for regulatory control because we were trying to keep the corporations from going back to the 1900s when we had monopolies. There are people who will look at this and say, how much money can we make? We need to know that people that make these masks don't get special breaks and more tax money that is not necessary just in this moment because it's a rush. And we can't forget that in past crises in American history, sometimes because nobody raised the question in the middle of it, people made a lot of money off of other people's suffering that they didn't have to. So thank you for raising it.
And we have to, as a people, I know it's so enticing to turn off the news and turn off the noise and to shelter down and to not pay attention, but we have to be extra vigilant in this moment to make sure our elected officials, those senators, those House members, are governing with our interests at stake. And we have to be watchful to make sure they're not doing what you speak about, Reverend Barber, which is allowing people to make money off of this suffering, off of this moment. That's not what this moment should be about. It needs to be about us coming together in our common humanity. So I just want to raise the number again. If you're watching, we need you to call your senator tonight or in the morning or both. The number is 855-999-1663. And you should tell them to put people before profit in the coronavirus response by providing health, housing, and economic stability for all of us, and extra support to those most vulnerable in our community. If we are also taking care of those, the most vulnerable, then we will all suffer in this moment. So I'm actually going to ask Reggie, who's been kindly monitoring our Facebook live stream, to share with us a few questions or comments he's seeing. I know folks, we'd love to hear from what folks are thinking online.
Yeah, thank you, Ronna, for that. And thank you to Ann Thompson helping me out. Like, as a former producer, I always shout out producers because, like, this stuff don't just happen. So shout out to the production team. There's a lot of commonality of sadness and a lot of, like, gratitude for the space. Cynthia Rhodes Kenny, this is so sad and stressful. This morning I was awakened by a panic attack. Cynthia, we see you, we hear you, we're here for you. One question that I can answer is, will people with disabilities be taken into account in this? So I was on the phone yesterday with Chuck Schumer as it relates to the response for COVID-3. He and the Democratic caucus is fighting specifically for inclusion of people with disabilities in the stimulus response. But to Rana's point and to the Reverend Doctor's point, we have to keep our elected officials accountable. This is not just Democrats, but also Republicans. So Mitch McConnell, to some extent, said that Republicans vote for this even if it makes you gag. That is a disgusting commentary for people who are supposedly work for us. So don't be dissuaded by the disgusting things that you hear from the senators. Hold them accountable, because if ever they need to be held accountable, that time is now. One question for folks that I will offer is, what advice would you give? So how can I help as an individual besides prayer and helping elderly neighbors? And this is from Naridia Launch.
So I love this question, right? I mean, there is so much that needs to get done right now. I mean, the reason we are launching this petition, the reason that we're asking folks to call senators, the reason we're asking people to talk to your local representatives is that there need to be moratoriums on evictions. There need to be moratoriums on shutoffs. There need to be infrastructure built in our communities so that nobody is left out, that all people have food being delivered to them as they need it, that we don't have shortages, and that we raise the immorality of being able to resolve these problems, being able to find that $5 trillion that Reverend Barber was just talking about to bail out businesses, but not be able to put together an infrastructure that lifts everybody up, right? That devalues life. And so so, I would ask folks online to get involved with the Poor People's Campaign. We're organized in states across the country. We have partners all across the world. You can go to poorpeoplescampaign.org and learn about how you can be involved in your community. There are thousands of people in your community that are a part of this campaign. And I would say that there's a lot of needs that need to be met, and we need to call on our elected officials to actually play the role that they were elected to do, which is to pass programs and a stimulus now and more agenda later that really lift the load of poverty, that lift the suffering, because it's possible. It does not have to be this way, and we need to put this out there. That this wasn't inevitable. Our response could have been better, and we can get out of this, and we can make and transform society for the better for everybody. When we have a saying in the Poor People's Campaign that when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises, right? When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. And so what we need is for our elected officials and for the people that are building a movement across this country to lift from the bottom and see this country and this world rise together.
I'm glad that your caller said more than just prayer, because actually we as people, as theologians, Liz and I know that prayer must be connected to works. The kind of prayer that we need in this season is the kind of prayer that is what one writer called rattling the cage of God, that asking for strength that God may allow you to rattle the cages of men and women. And so I would say to folk, pray, but then after you pray, let's call those who are praying, P-R-E-Y-A-G, on the least of these, who have been doing it for a while. And let's rattle those cages. We got all this time home, then fill up those lines. We all this time home. Okay, since you made it so we had to go home, you got us now close to our telephone, close to our computers, and for our brothers and sisters that don't have that, we're going to make 10 extra calls just for them, the ones that are on the street. This is the time to use every minute. You see something on the TV that makes you upset, go right to the phone. And we need to target. I want to talk about us targeting particularly McConnell Lynch, not this broad. And the reason I say both, because we need our Democrats to be bold. See, this is not the moment to keep talking about compromise. This is the moment to put before the majority of the Senate what ought to be done. If they want to cut it, let them cut it. But don't cut it for them. Don't remove the what needs to be done. Put a bold plan before them. The House that's controlled by Democrats should put a bold plan before folks. And then if folk want to vote against it in this environment, when everybody can see it, that's the one thing. I think it was a minister used to say, one thing football and basketball is that you get to see what the players when they violate something, so you can call the referee. You say, ref, that was a bad call. This is the time not to give people cover by refusing to put for them what ought to be put. This is the time to pull the covers all the way off. And this is not the time for Cuba. So yes, pray, and then let's rattle the cages, the legislative office of those who are praying, P-R-E-Y-N-G, on the least of these. All this time, let's do more than just sit around with it. Even if you're isolated, make sure you got a computer, a phone. And as I said, since we got a digital divide, for every person you can think of that's on the street that doesn't have what you have, make 10 extra calls for them. Let's mobilize and organize in this moment.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you. Reggie, I know there's more comments you wanted to share, or questions from folks.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Ron, for that. And thank you, Reverends, for that. One question or one comment, Rita Romaine Rakestraw, this is very helpful. Thank you for this guidance. I will make the call and spread the word to others I know. In Knightdale, North Carolina, important election in North Carolina, get Burr out. And one question that I had, that I don't have, but it's from Delilah Crespo. How do we help and support women and children stuck even more now with social distancing in abusive situations? One of the things that you alluded to, but I think that it bears repeating for all of us, is that this bad situation is making a horrendous situation like even worse for a lot of people. So how can we help those that are in abusive situations that are made even worse by this situation? What guidance might y'all have for that?
Well, it certainly is hard. And I think Liz has some insights as a woman and as a mother. You know, I was going to say earlier that one of the things that this germ and what's going on has made me focus on is that I was pulled early off the road because I have an immune deficiency because of a disease I carry. And so I know of ways. Our church, for instance, we've gone through training with the local public health. So we've developed food delivery to the housing development right behind our church. We have actually made a decision that we're going to keep a portion of our daycare open under the supervision of the healthcare so we can help mothers who work as nurses and women who work in the medical field who are on the front line. So there are things that we are trying to do in the immediacy, but let's be real, it's going to be hard to do it with the social distancing. And that's why there is a phrase that we often use. If we have to go through this, and if people are going to many are going to die, then let their deaths not be in vain. Let us not waste this moment, which is why we've got to hunker down and really fight for long, extending changes. You know, there are going to be things we can do in the community to help. As you know, we're going to be a lot of things we can do, but it will have its limitations. There was a philosopher that said that there was a person on the bank, the babies kept coming by in the river. They went out and took the babies out one at a time. The person standing with him left and started walking upstream. And he said, "Where are you going? These babies. He said, "You pull them out one at a time. I'm going upstream to find out who's throwing them in the first place." And as you said, because this is going on even before now, I don't want anybody to see demanding certain things that come out in these bills as not assisting the people that are in crisis. In fact, it's more both and than it is either or.
What I think we know about, history is that people come together in times like these, and they band together and they create community. Now, you can create community even if you have to social distance. And I've been hearing from the states across the country that are organizing in this campaign powerful stories of people coming up with creative solutions of homeschooling, creative solutions to make sure that people are getting their medicines, creative solutions of homeless families moving into abandoned houses and putting up self-quarantine signs and saying, "Don't come at me now." Creative solutions of folks advocating and winning public washing stations in places where there's deep homelessness. And so I think that those kinds of stories connected to these larger advocacy and organizing positions is what is needed in this time. And that is what's going to help individuals that are in need right now. That's always what has helped. And we can't let those in power profit off of our suffering and be let away from actually having to take responsibility for organizing society around the needs of everybody, including and especially the battered and abused and impoverished and neglected. And what we're seeing in this crisis is how normal that is. And there's nothing normal about it, right? But how every day that is, and that shouldn't be happening every day. And so it is our, as human beings living in this time, to know that people are living with raw sewage, that people are going without water, that women are being battered alone, that kids are going hungry, then we have a responsibility and we have an opportunity right now to do something about it. And